Jamar Chase just threw a helmet across the field on day one of training camp, and what started as a simple pushing match between your all-pro receiver and the defense just turned into the kind of chaos that's got the entire Cincinnati fan base questioning whether this team has what it takes to actually make a playoff run in 2026. I'm talking about a full-on altercation with multiple players involved, a nickel corner squaring up with the best receiver on the team, and a moment that happened so fast that most people who watched the initial footage didn't even realize what they were actually looking at. But here's the thing that's really got me thinking. Beneath all this drama, beneath all the helmet throwing and the jaw-jacking, there's actually something way more interesting happening with this Bengals team that nobody's talking about. Because when you break down exactly what went down, when you slow it down frame by frame, when you understand the sequence of events and who actually started this thing and why it escalated the way it did, you start to realize that maybe this isn't a sign of a team falling apart. Maybe this is a sign of a defense that's finally developing some swagger and some bite. Maybe this is exactly what Cincinnati needs. So let me take you through every single moment of this altercation, break down who did what, and explain why this day one training camp fight might actually be the most important thing that happened to the Bengals organization today. We're still talking about day one of Bengals training camp. The team is running 11 on 11s. That's full competitive work, where both offense and defense are going full speed with no restrictions. And remember, this is happening on the same day that Marr Stewart already got injured, so the energy is already a little weird, a little tense. The vibe has already shifted because you just watched a first-round pick get carted off. And then, in the middle of this same competitive period, things start escalating between the offense and the defense. But here's where the initial reporting got really confusing, because the headline that was circulating everywhere said Jamar Chase and DJ Turner got into it, with Chase ripping off Turner's helmet and throwing it. But when you actually watch the real footage instead of just reading the headline, the actual sequence of events is way more complicated and way more interesting than that. Here's what really happened. The altercation doesn't start with Jamar Chase and DJ Turner. It starts with Jamar Chase and another defensive player wearing number 33. Based on the jersey and the video evidence, this looks like Anthony, a defensive back who was drafted a few years back in the later rounds. These two are going at it verbally, getting in each other's faces, talking trash, and the intensity is rising. Then, almost immediately, Jalen Davis, your nickel corner, the same guy we talked about being physical and aggressive earlier, he comes over and gets directly involved. Now you've got Davis squaring up with Chase, and this is the moment that really stands out, because you're looking at a slot corner who's trying to make the squad willing to go head-to-head with the wide receiver one on this entire team. That takes guts, that takes fearlessness, and based on everything we saw from Davis on day one, he's got it in abundance. But here's where it gets really interesting. At some point during this escalation, during this chaotic moment when multiple guys are involved and everything is moving fast, Jamar Chase gets his hands on somebody's helmet and throws it. Now this is the moment everybody locked onto because it's the most dramatic visual. But the immediate question became, whose helmet is it actually? The reporting said it was DJ Turner's helmet, but when you actually try to identify the helmet by the numbers visible on the back, things get a little less clear. The helmet that Chase throws has a number on it, but identifying exactly who that belongs to in the middle of all that chaos is harder than you might think. What we know for certain is that a helmet got ripped off and thrown, which is the moment that had everybody talking because that's the most visually explosive moment of the whole thing. Then the veterans jump in. Kobe Young is literally in there pushing guys back, saying it's not worth it. This is stupid. The trainers are putting hands on people and physically separating everybody. And then it's done. The drill moves on. Guys head back to their positions and continue working. That's how this typically ends. Now here's what I think is really important to understand about training camp fights, and this is something that gets lost when people are just reacting emotionally to a clip without understanding context. Training camp fights happen at every single NFL team, every single year, multiple times during the month. This is not a Cincinnati thing. This is not a sign that the Bengals have some extraordinary discipline problem. This is just what happens when you put incredibly competitive men together for the first time after an off-season away from each other, give them football, crank up the intensity, and let them go full speed. Testosterone is flying. Guys are fighting for jobs. Guys are fighting for respect. Guys are fighting for position on the roster. And when you combine that level of competitive energy with the physical nature of football, sometimes things escalate beyond words into pushing and shoving. What's important to understand about this particular altercation is that no actual punches were thrown. This wasn't a brawl. This wasn't two guys legitimately fighting with closed fists trying to hurt each other. This was pushing. This was shoving. This was jawing. This was intense competitive energy that went physical. And that's different from an actual fight. That's actually pretty common and something that most coaching staff see as manageable as long as it doesn't cross certain lines, which this didn't. Now, the reason I'm interested in this altercation beyond just the surface level of, oh, they're fighting, is because of what it actually tells us about the dynamic on this team. Because this fight happens on the same exact day that Marr Stewart gets injured and the offense is cooking and scoring touchdowns while the defense is dealing with injuries and chaos. So now you've got the defense getting physically involved with the offense. And the question becomes, is this a sign that the defense is frustrated and trying to establish some toughness? Is this a sign that there's already tension building between the two sides of the ball? Is this a sign that the defense is trying to prove something? I think it's all of those things. Honestly, I think you've got a defensive unit that's already frustrated because they just lost a key player to injury. They're trying to prove something. They're trying to show that they belong in the same conversation as the elite offense. And when they get a chance to get physical with those guys and test themselves, they take it. And from a pure football perspective, there's actually something kind of beautiful about that. There's something to be said for a defense that's not intimidated by an all-pro receiver and that's willing to go toe-to-toe with the best players on the team. Let me really focus on Jalen Davis for a second, because this guy deserves credit for what he showed on day one. This is a player who came into training camp knowing his position isn't guaranteed. There's competition above him. Dax Hill is in the mix. Gio Taylor is in the mix. Takario Davis might be in the mix. So Davis knows he's fighting for his job. And what does he do on day one? He gets in there and he's mixing it up with Chase. He's getting physical with Mike Gesicki. And then, during this altercation with Chase, instead of backing down, he squares up. He's willing to go at it with one of the most talented receivers in the entire league. That's the kind of mentality that actually wins football games. That's the kind of mentality that turns a mediocre defense into a respectable one. Because here's the thing about playing defense in the NFL. It's not just about athletic ability and coverage skills and ability to read plays. It's about attitude. It's about swagger. It's about believing that you're the best player on the field. It's about not being intimidated by anybody, no matter how famous they are or how much money they make or what their production numbers are. And Jalen Davis showed on day one that he's got that. He's got that competitor's mentality. He's got that swagger. And when he talks after practice and says, I hope there's a fight every day, he's basically telling you that he lives for this competition, that he's not scared, that he's ready to go at it with anybody. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is that some people are going to look at this altercation and say this is bad. This is undisciplined. This is the kind of thing that derails teams. And I understand that perspective. Coaches absolutely don't love when their players are getting into scuffles and risking injury over nothing. Joe Burrow made it clear after practice that this kind of stuff needs to not affect the flow of practice, that they need to keep things moving and focused. And he's right about that. You don't want training camp to turn into a fighting competition instead of a football competition. But at the same time, there's a difference between saying we need to keep practice focused and saying we need to eliminate all physicality in competition. And I think what the Bengals did here was actually the right balance. Because what happened after this altercation? The coaching staff didn't shut down the entire defense. The coaching staff didn't suspend anybody or make it into this huge deal. The veterans stepped in and de-escalated it. The trainers separated everybody. And then the team moved on. That's handling it correctly. That's showing your team that you understand the difference between competitive physicality that's part of football and actual discipline problems that need to be addressed. And here's something else that's important to understand about training camp versus the regular season. In training camp, this kind of stuff is actually healthy because there are no real consequences. Nobody's getting fined by the league. Nobody's getting suspended. The games don't count. It's a controlled environment where teams are literally building culture and intensity and competition. In the regular season, that same altercation would have gotten players ejected and fined thousands of dollars. So training camp is actually the perfect place for this stuff to happen because it lets guys get the aggression out, it lets them understand the limits of what they can do, and it lets the coaching staff figure out how to manage their personalities and their intensity. The fact that this happened on day one and the team handled it appropriately and moved on tells me that the coaching staff has some level of control over this roster and understands how to manage personalities. That's not nothing. That's actually a sign of competent leadership. What I'm really interested in watching over the next few weeks is whether this becomes a pattern. If the Bengals keep having altercations, if the coaching staff can't control the intensity, if there are actual suspensions or injuries that result from training camp fights, then we've got a real problem. But based on what we saw on day one, I think this was just one moment in what's going to be a long training camp. I think the team will move forward and be fine. Let me talk about what this altercation actually tells us about Ja'Marr Chase as a person and as a player, because I think that's important context. Chase is one of the most talented receivers in the entire NFL. He's an all-pro. He's one of the best players on the Cincinnati Bengals. And based on everything we know about him, he's incredibly competitive and incredibly intense. He's the type of player who's constantly at 10, constantly locked in, constantly thinking about football, constantly trying to make everybody around him better through sheer force of will and intensity. Sometimes that intensity manifests in ways that look negative on the surface. Sometimes that competitive fire spills over into situations that probably don't need to be as heated as he makes them. But at the same time, that's exactly the thing that makes him great. You can't separate Chase's talent and his production from that competitive intensity. They're completely intertwined. So when he gets into it with the defense, is it ideal? No. But is it surprising? Not at all. Is it a sign of systemic problems with this team? I don't think so. I think it's a sign that you've got a player who cares deeply about football, who's intensely competitive, and who's willing to go at it in practice to try to get better and to push the people around him to get better. That's not a character flaw. That's actually a strength. That's the reason he's an all-pro receiver. The whole situation also highlights something that I think is really important about the state of the Cincinnati Bengals defense. For years now, this unit has been the weak link on the team. Despite having one of the most explosive offenses in football, the defense has consistently been the thing that holds them back from making deep playoff runs. So when you see defensive players willing to get physical with the best offensive players and not back down, when you see them competing hard and showing swagger, that's actually a really positive sign. That's a sign that maybe, just maybe, this defensive group is starting to develop some belief that they can actually be good at this. Jalen Davis especially seems to be embodying that mentality. This is a guy who's not intimidated by Ja'Marr Chase. This is a guy who's willing to square up physically with him. This is a guy who's saying, after practice, I hope there's a fight every day. That's the kind of energy that can change a locker room's approach to defense. That's the kind of swagger that can make guys believe that they're capable of being better. So here's my final assessment of the Ja'Marr Chase altercation and what it means for the 2026 Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, it's not ideal that this happened on day one of training camp. Yes, it's something the coaching staff probably would have preferred to avoid. Yes, it's going to create headlines and social media buzz and generate discussion. But no, I don't think this is a sign of systemic discipline problems or a fractured locker room. I think this is just football. I think this is what happens when incredibly competitive players come together and start playing for the first time after an offseason. Sometimes there's going to be friction. Sometimes there's going to be pushing and shoving. As long as it doesn't turn into something genuinely dangerous or create long-term issues in the locker room, it's manageable. What matters moving forward is whether the team takes that competitive energy and channels it into something productive. Can they use that intensity to build a better defense? Can they use that swagger to create a culture where guys actually believe they can compete with the best teams in the league? That's what's going to matter. One day, one altercation doesn't make or break a season, but consistent competitive energy and a culture of accountability and toughness, that can absolutely make or break a season. So there you have it, the complete breakdown of what actually happened during that Ja'Marr Chase altercation and what it really means for this Cincinnati Bengals team. If you're not already subscribed to Dre Talk Sports, now's absolutely the time to do it, because we're going to be covering every single angle of this training camp. We're going to break down every injury update, every competitive moment, every storyline that develops as this team builds toward 2026. Drop a like on this video if you appreciate getting the actual breakdown of what happened instead of just accepting whatever headline the internet was pushing. Don't just watch a 15-second clip and make your judgment. Watch the full footage and understand what you're actually looking at. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think about this altercation. Do you think it's a sign of good competitive energy or bad discipline? Are you concerned about the locker room chemistry? Do you think Jalen Davis showed something special by getting in there with Chase? What's your take? Let me know in the comments because I read every single one and I genuinely appreciate all the different perspectives and insights. Subscribe to Dre Talk Sports right now for all your no-filter, completely unfiltered takes on football, basketball, and everything else happening in the sports world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video when we go live with breaking news or deep dives into the biggest stories. Because training camp is heating up, and there's going to be something new happening every single day. We're going to have injury updates, performance breakdowns, expert analysis, and insider reports that you're not going to find anywhere else. Join the community of real sports fans who actually care about understanding what's going on instead of just accepting whatever narrative the mainstream media is pushing at you. We're keeping it real here on Dre Talk Sports. We're giving you the complete picture. We're breaking down exactly what happened and why it matters. That's what separates us from everybody else doing sports commentary. So smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications, and let's keep this conversation going. The 2026 NFL season is going to be absolutely wild, and the Cincinnati Bengals are going to be right in the middle of everything. You don't want to miss a single moment of this journey. Stay locked in with Dre Talk Sports, where we keep it spicy, we keep it real, and we always keep it authentic. Peace.